Hey people, let's talk about Greenland. Did you know that Greenland used to have over 4,000 kilometers of secret underground tunnels for mobile ICBMs? And did you know that the materials for Camp Century, Greenland's underground nuclear base, were originally going to be used on the moon to build Camp Horizon? And the most amazing fact I've researched for you is, did you know that Harry Truman tried to buy Greenland in the 1940s from Denmark for $100 million? The secrets under the ice in Greenland are very deep. Hey everybody, peace, love and understanding. You know that Donald Trump is proposing to buy Greenland and make it part of the United States.
Trump wants to buy Greenland.
It's a large real estate deal. So the concept came up and I said certainly I'd be strategically it's interesting.
Well, as I said, Harry Truman also tried to buy it back in the 1940s. It's owned by Denmark, but is its own autonomous country. It's part of the Greater Kingdom of Denmark. But the real question is, why is Greenland so interesting? Why do the US want it? What's there? And what have they done with it in the past? Let's look at that today. Well, it all started in World War II. Greenland is strategically very important. If you could have a base on Greenland, you could control by aircraft the North Atlantic. And Denmark was an ally in World War II and agreed to let the United States use it during the length of the conflict only. Oh, hang on a minute. I got something wrong. I always share my videos with Patreon before I share them with you on YouTube. And fantastically, one of my patrons knows all about the history of Greenland and Denmark. So they shared this with me. Technically, Denmark was not an ally in World War II. The Danish ambassador in the US acted alone and went against the Danish government. He was seen as a traitor for doing that. Of course, because the Nazis weren't happy with it and had occupied Denmark. What he proposed to the US was this. The US could have a base on Greenland if they promised to protect Greenland from coming under Nazi rule. The US agreed to that, and it's significant because at the time the US wasn't actually part of World War II. So the handover and agreement happened before Pearl Harbor. In the end, it was fantastic because you could make little steps from the US to Europe via Greenland and then Iceland and then into Scotland or wherever you were going to fly your planes. Greenland was significant to World War II, long before the US knew it. Thanks, patrons, that's great. That's why I share my films with you before I publish them to YouTube. If you want to get involved and share your knowledge with me that will become part of new films, become a patron. For the price of a coffee, you get to see the films early, have an input, and it directly helps me actually make further films. Let's get back to Greenland. After World War II, we had the Cold War, and if you could build a base with radar stations on Greenland, you might be able to see pesky incoming ICBMs flying over the North Pole from the Soviet Union. So that's what they did. In one summer, in one season, they built the base at Thule. It's so far north on the east coast of Greenland. Oops, northwest Greenland. It's only even light in the summer. Most of the winter, it's completely pitch black. US built a gravel runway and radars. It was part of the DEW line, DEW, Distant Early Warning. They built a radar like a fence. Anything flying through the fence, they could calculate its direction and speed. I'm guessing they could see ICBMs taking off because once they're in space, they become ballistic and, what are you going to do? But of course, back in the 1950s, you also had Ruski bombers who would fly over the North Pole towards Canada and the United States. So you'd want to see them coming. So they built the DEW line at Thule. Greenland was really a new frontier, but there was a high frontier, and that's the moon. In the 1950s, there was a plan for a manned moon base called Project horizon. The plan was to build it by scooping out moon dust and putting a structure underneath and then covering it. Cut and cover, it's a standard building technology. Ask London Transport. But it never happened. Instead, the money was spent on something called Project Apollo, and Neil and Buzz walked on the moon. Great, but they had fully engineered the buildings for Project Horizon on the moon, so they sent it to Greenland. Meet Camp Century, moon base, Greenland.
Today on the island of Greenland, as part of man's continuing efforts to master the secrets of survival in the Arctic, the United States Army has established an unprecedented nuclear-powered Arctic Research Center. Located in a wilderness of ice and snow, Camp Century is 150 miles from Thule, its nearest base of supply. This is an ideal Arctic laboratory. For more than 90% of Greenland is permanently frozen under a polar ice cap which covers all but a few coastal areas of the island. Camp Century is buried below the surface of this ice cap. Beneath it, the ice descends for 6,000 feet. In this remote setting, less than 800 miles from the North Pole, Camp Century is a symbol of man's unceasing struggle to conquer his environment, to increase his ability to live and fight if necessary under polar conditions. This is the story of Camp Century, the city under ice.
Under the ice, nuclear powered, and really wasn't there for any reason. Oh, yes, it was. It was actually the base for Project Iceworm. Project Iceworm was really secret, digging and melting tunnels out from Camp Century. They built over 4,000 kilometers of underground tunnels to house mobile ICBM launchers. Good secret plan, but it didn't work. The tunnels often collapsed or melted, and it wasn't actually going to work. It was just abandoned, possibly leaving the nuclear reactor, I really don't know, from Camp Century under the ice in Greenland. But here's a big secret thing I've heard about Greenland. While researching films on Rendlesham Forest, as you do. Oh, Rendlesham Forest, part of SDI or Star Wars. Of course, that's the same as the time manipulation in Greenland project. What? Time manipulation in Greenland? It's true. There was a science investigation to build a time cone. That's what they called it in Greenland. A cone of time difference that if an ICBM flew into, it would disappear. A bit like MH370, but we'll get on to that. The real proposal, and we don't know if they built it because there was lots of crazy things going on at the time, was to actually have some kind of gravity well or time-space distortion over the Arctic that would be a shield against incoming anything that could hit the United States as part of Star Wars or the Strategic Defense Initiative or SDI. For me, that's the most interesting part of this story about Greenland. A time cone manipulation device. So let's talk about how you manipulate time. If you can. Everybody in the world, everybody on YouTube talks about anti-gravity. Well, I don't think there is anything such as anti-gravity because gravity isn't a force. Gravity is a side effect of distorted space-time. But there are anti-gravity augmentation systems, but aren't anti-gravity. There's an above-wing plasma system that B-2 bombers probably use. I don't know, that produces a laminar flow over a wing to produce and help lift. But it's not anti-gravity. The people working on anti-gravity were doing time and space manipulation, not gravity. So it makes a lot of sense on a blackboard anyway, that there was a project in Greenland that could distort space time. That would potentially mean anything that went into a time cone that you could project and build over the Arctic would disappear. But with all these advanced physics systems, they work on paper. They're actually quite a good idea, but there's a big problem, and that's you need a really, really big power supply. I mean, bigger than our star, bigger than the sun. How are you going to switch it on? I mean, that's what Robert Watson Watt had the problem with Tesla's death ray. He said, I understand in principle how it might work, but it does not work because I don't have the power supply. And that's true of a time cone over the Arctic. Could it be built? In theory. Was it built? Probably not. But I'll leave you with something very intriguing. Imagine you were in a WWII 777 flying out of Malaysia and you wanted to make it disappear. If you actually had a time cone or some way of manipulating space and time, as soon as the plane flew into it, it would disappear. In fact, what would happen, as it entered the cone, it would be exiting at the other time. So the moment an atom went in one side, it was coming out the other. The bit in the middle, whether it's a gateway to the island of Diego Garcia or to the planet Zog, is irrelevant. It is instantaneous. Go in and come out at the same moment. That would visually look something like this. That's why, folks, I'm interested in the disappearance of MH370. Visually, it demonstrates an advanced physics weapon. Maybe a weapon that they tried to build in Greenland. We live in interesting times. The truth is out there.